Aquila and Priscilla, what do we know? Not near enough to justify a long video, but if you want to learn about them, I'll give you the range. All you're gonna need is 7 minutes and change. I wrote that myself. That was from my heart. That was a part of me, a part of who I am. So you owe me one. Aquila and Priscilla are pretty minor characters in terms of the Bible. They come up a whopping 4 times, like 3 times in Acts 18, but 4 times total in the general sense. But it seems like they played a really big role in the whole evolution of the early church and a really big role in influencing a couple of key leaders, that being Apollos of Alexandria. I did another video about that you can check out if you feel like it. And the big guy in terms of making the church happen, and that was Paul of Tarsus. Well, here's the deal. They were Jewish people from Rome, so they were living in a place where ethnic and religious friction had happened over the years. There'd actually been 2 expulsions over the last couple hundred of years of Jewish people from the city of Rome, presumably for proselytizing or I don't know what. Historically, do people even need a reason to pick on Jewish people? It's like one big, long history of them being mistreated by everybody you could possibly imagine. So for whatever reason, people get grouchy. They kick the Jews out of Rome. The most recent, prior to Aquila and Priscilla, had been an expulsion by Tiberius. But this time around, it's the Emperor Claudius. And in Acts 18, verse 2, I think it's in verse 2, it is in verse 2, we have a reference to this expulsion. And there are, I think, 3 historians who also reference this event. Cassius Dio, Suetonius, and then some guy that came way after the fact, and I'm forgetting his name. I'll put it on the screen. Whatever the case, this gives us a ballpark of the date at which time these Jewish Roman Christians got the boot and had to relocate. As we read on in Acts chapter 18, we figure out that Aquila and Priscilla, who interestingly are never mentioned separately, they are always a package deal when they come up in the Bible. These 2 relocate to Corinth, which is on that teeny, tiny little sliver of land between the Attican Peninsula and the Peloponnesian Peninsula of Lower Greece. Very important town, very cosmopolitan city, and I did a video about that one as well, so you can go check that out if you want. They end up in Corinth, and serendipitously, providentially, however you want to call it, Paul of Tarsus also ends up in Corinth at that same time. It looks like they probably literally made tents together. We can kind of guess that somewhere in the still standing ruins of the mall in Corinth, they probably had a shop or a storefront or somewhere that they worked out of, and almost surely Paul crashed on their couch for probably about 18 months. Paul's stay in Corinth was it probably was his longest voluntary visit anywhere during this time. These guys plant a church in Corinth. They are popular in Corinth. They wield influence in Corinth. And Priscilla and Aquila, or Aquila and Priscilla, I talked about these guys a few videos back, and there was some sort of argument in the comment section about what order you say them in. I don't know. I'm just winging it here. These 2 decide to go along with Paul on his journey back east that is headed ultimately toward Syria and on to Jerusalem. But they pump the brakes in Ephesus, modern-day Turkey, around Izmir, and they end up being instrumental in the development of the church there in Ephesus, at which time they run into the very famous Apollos of Alexandria. And Aquila and Priscilla are the 2 who hear Apollos teaching. They're like, that guy's really, really good at this stuff. But also, he's clearly a disciple of John the Baptist and hasn't connected all the dots on the actual message of salvation from Jesus yet. So they sit him down. Apollos is super nice and teachable, and they work the whole thing out together. Apollos becomes an ally, and we know that Apollos ends up back in Corinth at a later time, kind of picking up where Aquila, Priscilla, and Paul had left off. And in fact, he is so successful there that Paul has to write a letter back to the Corinthian church later in which he affirms Aquila and Priscilla and also affirms Apollos and affirms that God is the one who makes the church happen and the gospel happen, and we don't need to get weird and pick sides. And it seems like all of these characters were good actors, people of goodwill in this situation in trying to pacify this religious tribalism that wanted to rear its ugly head in Corinth. Well, we also know that the ban on Jews in Rome, which if you look at the literal language of Claudius's ban, by the way, it looks like it had to do, well, he mentions a character, Chrestus, that there's this this constant promotion of this Chrestus guy, and probably we're talking about Jesus there. So it looks like the Romans weren't real clear when this expulsion happened on whether the Jews or the Christian Jews, or whether this was some kind of subsect, like who the actual problem was. So in classic anti-Semitic fashion, we just wash our hands of all the Jewish people. Whatever the case, this ban gets lifted, and it looks as though Aquila and Priscilla, sorry, a lot of names here, make their way back to Rome and are leading a church there once again. They come up in the letter to the Roman church, right at the very end of the book of Romans, I think, as Paul references and affirms them once again. So this covers like a maybe 18-year time span where Paul and Aquila and Priscilla are partners and friends and work together. And there was an interesting theory that was put forward by a film that came out this year called Paul, Apostle of Christ, which, plugging myself a lot here, which I described or reviewed in a video that I did, I don't know, maybe like 6 months ago, and you can check that out also if you want. And in that movie, the folks who did it postulate that in Paul's last imprisonment in Rome, Luke must have made his way back because, well, in the letter to Timothy, 2 Timothy, Luke is referenced and as being there and not having abandoned Paul. And so presumably, Acts or some of the source material of Acts came out of Luke's interaction with Paul in that Mamertine prison before Paul was executed. And Priscilla and Aquila, we assume, would have been there in Rome at the same time. So if you want kind of a dramatic speculation of what all of those relationships might have looked like, check out Paul, Apostle of Christ, which I think is like my favorite Christian movie that I've seen in a very, very long time. So Priscilla, Aquila, honored throughout the history of the church, honored by the Eastern Orthodox Church, honored by the Catholic Church, well regarded among Protestants, and they look really good in terms of the account of them in the Bible. They only come up a little bit, but they seem to have cast a really long shadow in a good way. That's all I can think of. If you know more stuff about them that I forgot, throw it out in the comment section and I'll check it out. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. See you soon. Aquila and Priscilla, what do we know? Not near enough to justify a long video, but if you want to learn about them, I'll give you the range. All you're gonna need is 7 minutes and change.